Shalom, I'm Brother Rael from Reyahnited Soul, and in this video, I'll be discussing part 2 of the men of Yahudah shall be as David. So let us nourish our soul with scripture that we may reunite with the Most High, the Elohim of Yisrael. Now let's get right into it. I concluded on part 1 with the death of King Saul as he battled the Philistines according to 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 6. I will begin part 2 with David receiving the news of King Saul's death. Now 3 days after David slayed the Amalekites, according to 1 Samuel chapter 30 verse 17, a man from Saul's battle approached David in Ziklag with the crown of King Saul. The man identified himself as an Amalekite and told David what had happened. How he came upon King Saul's dying body in the midst of the battle, and that Saul had requested for him to end his life before the Philistines found him, and the man killed Saul at his request, according to 2 Samuel chapter 1 verses 6 through 10. Now, this Amalekite that slain King Saul stood before David, handing him the crown. It would appear that this Amalekite was an honorable warrior because he could have went elsewhere and sold the crown for a profit. Now, you think David would have greatly rewarded this man for escaping and bringing him the crown of Saul, but not according to 2 Samuel chapter 1 verses 14 through 16, and I read. And David said unto him, How wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of the young men and said, Go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, Thy blood be upon thy head, for thy mouth hath testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. And the men of Yahudah shall be as David. Take note that David avoided harming Saul for one reason. Saul was the Most High's anointed king of Yisrael, and David his servant. Harming Saul would have come at a heavy penalty. Remember, David is a man of war, a man of principle with reverence for the Most High. And the Most High specifically said not to touch his anointed, according to 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verses 18 through 22, and I read, Saying unto thee, Will I give the land of Canaan, the land of your inheritance, when ye were but a few, even a few, and strangers in it. And when they went from nation to nation, and from one kingdom to another people, he suffered no man to do them wrong. Yea, he reproved kings for their sake, saying, Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm. The King James Version say anointed. However, the New King James Version and the NIV use anointed ones. Now, on a side note, the Hebrew word Hamashiach means the anointed one. So, after David became king of Yisrael, the Philistines came against him. David, as always, inquired to the Most High according to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 19, and I read, And David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up to the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into mine hand? And the Lord said unto David, Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thine hand. And David went up and smote the Philistines. Yet again, the Philistines came against David, and again he inquired to the Most High, according to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 23 through 25, and I read, And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, Thou shalt not go up, but fetch a compass behind them, and come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And let it be, when thou hearest the sound of a going in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then thou shalt bestir thyself. For then shall the Lord go up before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. And David did so, as the Lord commanded him, and smote the Philistines from Gibeah until thou come to Gazer. One shouldn't assume what the Most High will say or do in any given situation. If David was attacked daily, he would inquire to the Most High daily. We must follow the Most High's instructions if we are to benefit from our heritage. David was a man of war, a man of principle, and an honorable warrior. All that takes order, discipline, and maturity. And the men of Yahudah shall be as David. 2 Samuel chapter 8 documents how David subdued the Philistines, Moab, king of Zobah, the Syrians, children of Ammon, the Amalekites, and the Edomites in battle. King David was not shy when it came to fighting. He did what needed to be done when it came to winning battles. That's why King David is the standard bearer for the men of Yahudah. When they return to the land and the inhabitants of Jerusalem need defending, according to Zechariah chapter 12, verse 8, and I read, "In that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them at that day shall be as David. And the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of the Lord before them." So it came to pass in chapter 11, while the army of Yisrael was destroying the children of Ammon, David remained in Jerusalem and came into contact with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who was on the battlefield fighting for King David. David was an honorable warrior, however, had weaknesses as a man and went into Bathsheba, who became pregnant with his child. Then to add to this transgression, David tried to cover it up by bringing Uriah home from battle to his wife that he may lay with her, to eliminate any suspicions when the child was born. Being the honorable warrior Uriah was, he declined any pleasurable activity while his fellow warriors were still fighting in battle. This totally ruined David's plan A, so he had to come up with plan B. If only David had thought the same as Uriah, he could have avoided contact with Bathsheba, but he entertained the thought too long and succumbed to it. To put it simply, David should have been on that battlefield doing what he does best, sending his enemies to the grave. Be careful, my brothers and sisters, when you find your mind and your hands idle and in strange company, be mindful. In most cases, when you fall short of being faithful to your partner, it's not because you underestimated your own weakness. It's because you underestimated the other person's willingness to seduce you. Brothers and sisters, the statistics of infidelity in this Babylonian system is staggering. The best way of not becoming a statistic is to remove yourself from the equation whenever temptation knocks on your door or calls you. But I digress. David sent Uriah the Hittite, an honorable warrior, back to the battle where the fighting was the hottest, that he may fall in battle. I love the story of David. However, this part really tarnishes a great king and a great warrior. The lesson to be learned here is that we can never elevate a man. And King David, no matter how great, was just a man. However, a man after the Most High's heart. The Most High sent Nathan, King David's son, to confront him according to 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 9 through 12, and I read, "Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thy own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this sun. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, and before the sun." A heavy penalty to pay. King David could have had any available woman in his kingdom, but instead chose forbidden fruit. A warrior belongs on the battlefield when a battle is being fought, not sitting around with an idle mind and idle hands. The child Bathsheba bore with David was struck with sickness according to 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 14 through 15, and died. Then David battled the children of Ammon and defeated them. Fast forward to Absalom, King David's son, putting his brother Amnon to death for lying with their sister, according to 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 28 through 29. Then Absalom fled to escape any retribution. David had lost 2 children at this time, while his son Absalom was on the run. Absalom was in exile for 3 years when David allowed him to return. As Absalom's influence grew in his father's kingdom, Absalom began the takeover of David's kingdom, which actually caused David to flee his home, according to 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 14. And I read, "And David said unto all his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, Arise, and let us flee, for we shall not escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtakes us suddenly and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword." Now this is the evil verse 11 spoke of, taking fruition in the house of David. David again found himself in the wilderness with his valiant men and being pursued by his son Absalom with the army of Yisrael. David finally sent his valiant men to engage Absalom, but gave specific instruction that Absalom not be harmed. His men went into battle according to 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 6 through 7, and I read, "So the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. And there was there a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. For the battle was there scattered over the face of all the country. And the wood devoured most people that day than the sword devoured. And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. While Absalom hung from an oak, Joab, one of David's captains, had his men slay Absalom, according to 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 14 through 15, and I read, "Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand, and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about, and smote Absalom, and slew him. Therefore the sword shall not depart from thine house, according to 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 10. David just lost his 3rd child since taking the life and wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, fast forward to chapter 21. King David faced a 3-year famine. David, of course, inquired to the Most High and found the famine to be the result of King Saul spilling Gibeonite blood that he should not have. As king, David needed to correct Saul's error to end the famine in the land. David went to the Gibeonites and asked, what can he do to make an atonement for King Saul's transgression? The Gibeonites refused silver or gold from the house of Saul, but they required 7 men from the house of Saul to be delivered to them. And David granted their request, with the exception of Jonathan's son. Remember, Jonathan, Saul's son, and David were closer than brothers. So David spared Jonathan's son. The 7 males that were delivered to the Gibeonites were put to death. David did what needed to be done to end the famine in his land. I'm sure not all people were in agreement, but David inquired to the Most High to do what was right. And that's all that matters, getting it right with the Most High. Then again, the Philistines came against David, and he met them in battle. Then King David, however, waxed faint, according to 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 15, and I read, Moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel. And David went down and his servants with him and fought against the Philistines, and David waxed faint. The valiant man of David requested that he no longer go into the battle, lest he falls, and Yisrael will be without a king. The sword pursued David as the Philistines came against him 3 more times, and David's men defeated them each time. Now, in chapter 24, David called for the numbering of Yisrael and Yahudah, and angered the Most High, according to 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, and I read, And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, Go number Israel and Judah. For the king said to Joab, the captain of the host, which was with him, Go now through all the tribes of Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, and number ye the people, that I may know the number of the people. And Joab said unto the king, Now the Lord thy God add unto the people, and how many soever they be, 100-fold, and that the eyes of my lord the king may see it. But why doth my lord the king delight in this thing? Notwithstanding, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the host. And Joab and the captains of the host went out from the presence of the king to number the people of Israel. If only David would have inquired, as he always done, to the Most High, this could have been prevented. However, as it states in verse 1, David was moved to do so. Then he came to the realization of what he'd done, according to 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 10, and I read, And David's heart smote him after that he had numbered the people. And David said unto the Lord, I have sinned greatly in that I have done. And now I beseech thee, O Lord, take away the iniquity of thy servant, for I have done very foolishly. So the Most High gave King David 3 choices of retributions, according to 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 13. 1, 7 years of famine. 2, 3 months of fleeing from your enemy while they pursued. And 3 days of pestilence in the land. Can you imagine being in King David's shoes at that time and having to choose a punishment that would involve not only you, but your people? I was leaning more towards fleeing while being pursued by your enemies. Number 2, because David has experience in fighting on the run. But then I thought, while King David fled, that would have left his kingdom vulnerable for further attacks. However, I know number 1 would not be an option. And this is the result according to 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 15, and I read, So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning even to the time appointed, and there died of the people from Dan even to Beersheba 70,000 men. Then the Most High showed mercy according to 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 16 through 18, and I read, And when the angel stretched out his hand upon Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord repented of him of the evil, and said to the angel that destroyed the people, It is enough. Stay now thine hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing place of Araunah, the Jebusite. And David spake unto the Lord when he saw the angel that smote the people, and said, Lo, I have sinned, and I have done wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Let thine hand, I pray thee, be against me and against my father's house. And Gad came that day to David and said unto him, Go up, rear an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. This was more than David could bear as king. He desired for the wrath to be upon him and him alone. If we think about today's politician losing 70,000 men, it would have been like our thoughts and prayers, yada, 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 and kept it moving. But not David. He was just a man, but a man that wanted to do right by the Most High and his people. So when David came to the threshing floor, Araunah offered to give him whatever he needed for a burnt offering to the Most High. Please take note how David responded according to 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 24, and I read, "And the king said unto Araunah, Nay, but I will surely buy it off thee at a price. Neither will I offer burnt offerings unto the Lord my God, that which doth cost me nothing." So David brought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. Now, how many people you know in that situation would have been like, cool, let me have this, that, and the other so I can handle this business? King David knew that he could not come to the Most High with an offering that cost him nothing. David, a man after the Most High's own heart, he had so much reverence for the Most High. "And the men of Yahudah shall be as David." In 1 Kings chapter 1, it describes an old King David, stricken in years, and his son Adonijah attempted to self-appoint himself as king by gathering supporters. When David heard of this, he made his son Solomon to be king, and Adonijah submitted to his brother. In 1 Kings chapter 2, David speaks to Solomon according to 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, and I read, "Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, and his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou may prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. That the Lord may continue his word which he spake concerning me, saying, If thy children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth, and with all their heart, and with all their soul, there shall not fail thee, said he, a man on the throne of Israel." So David slept with his fathers according to 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 10 through 11, and I read, "So David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron, and 33 years reigned he in Jerusalem." Words of wisdom that all fathers should be telling their sons, and not just imparting, but continuously throughout their years. King David, a man after the Most High's own heart, a brave shepherd and an honorable warrior, and great king whose kingdom saw no corruption of idolatry. Even while separated from his people, while avoiding King Saul, David dwelled in the land of the Philistines, and according to 1 Samuel chapter 27, verse 5, David asked the king for a place to dwell away from their royal city. Now, what do you think was going on in that royal city of the Philistines? They were practicing their customs and worshiping their idols, which David wanted nothing to do with. "And the men of Yahudah shall be as David." I'll conclude by emphasizing how problematic idolatry was to our ancestors. It sounds absolutely ridiculous to worship anything other than the Most High, but our ancestors' history was riddled with idolatry. Whenever the Most High's people mingle with other nations, idolatry seems to creep in. Remember the golden calf, according to Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 5? Now this was shortly after seeing with their own eyes the Most High's power as he delivered them out of Egypt. Yet they were willing to overlook what they knew as truth and give that credit to an idol. Also keep in mind that it was a mixed multitude that followed Yisrael out of Egypt, according to Exodus chapter 12, verse 38. Whenever our ancestors mixed with other nations, our ancestors seemed prone to adopting their ways and their gods. And although the Most High said that he would scatter his people and how they will serve other gods, according to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64, many of our people won't even consider the possibility of idol worship, although it is happening. We as the Most High's people cannot be so arrogant that we're too sophisticated and intelligent to be bamboozled into idol worship in the land of our captivity, although it's been prophesied. If anyone has doubts about Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64, take heed to Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 24 through 25, and I read, "For I will take you from among the heathen, and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean from all your filthiness, and from all your idols will I cleanse you." Now, this clearly states that the Most High will cleanse his people from our filth and all our idols once he gathers us and brings us into our land. However, according to New Testament doctrine, this has already occurred through shedding the Messiah's blood. Let's take a quick look. If we've already been cleansed and forgiven according to New Testament scriptures, what is the need for Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 24 through 25? I'll also emphasize Isaiah chapter 43, verse 11, and I read, "I, even I, am the Lord, and beside me there is no Savior." A word to the wise is sufficient. Seek only the Most High. Put nothing before him or beside him. So, the Most High's people will still be worshiping idols until he gathers us away from the heathen. I humbly submit to you, my brothers and sisters, although we're still in the land of our captivity, do as David did while in the land of the Philistines, and separate yourselves from their customs, traditions, and idols. This concludes the discussion of "The men of Yahudah shall be as David." I hope that you may have found something useful in this discussion. As always, keep your trust in the Most High. Love him with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. See to it that your household is in line with the word of the Most High as best you can. And with that, I say to you, Shalom.